Zayin. So the Rebbe now is going to explain that the Alter Rebbe Take is with the view that there's no shaykh aminui by a cotton, and still, even though min haTorah it doesn't apply, and even though you cannot be memane him, and based on the Ragachover, if he does it, that doing that you do in a zman when you're not mechuyev, when you're not bar mitzvah, you're a cotton, helps for a zman when you're mechuyev, and that's why you don't have to bring the second korban. As the Rebbe will bring different examples, which means not the Ragachover the way we explained now before the Rebbe brought out. He says that a cotton is shaykh to minui. The father can be memana him, and that's why he's yotzer, and he doesn't have to bring korban pit. But here the Ragachover says that even if at the time of the chiv you're not there, and it brings examples, still it applies. So when the cotton brought the korban pit, when he's not mechuyev, it still helps for later on. The Rebbe explains Zayin. Yes, lemer they be in them. We can say the explanation of this is Leuten Klal was the Ragachover nemt a ruis from the Psaka Rambam Manal. That's the rule that the Ragachover derives from the Rambam's ruling in the Korban Pesach that he does not have to bring a second korban. As gam betur, that also an exemption or an exempt act. Apulas mitzvah was metut b'shas apatur, an act of a mitzvah you do in the time that you're exempt. Even the hapula shaloi kayemes, since that act exists, niftar ab is mentioned as chayev, so he is exempt even during the time that he is obligated. So an act that lasts, even though it was done at a time when you're not obligated, still it exists, it exempts you even at the time that you were obligated. And the Rebbe will later on explain what does it mean in our case, so that the cotton did the Korban Pesach when he was a minor. What does it mean that that act lasts for? The Rebbe is going to explain it actually lasts till the second Pesach, because a person who brought the first Pesach doesn't have to bring the second Pesach, as the Rebbe will explain. But first, he brings several examples in where you're doing a mitzvah when you're not mechuyev, and yet it lasts after when you become mechuyev. It helps you to fulfill your obligation when you become mechuyev. Amen. Some of the proofs is Aleph. Bahagis mashma. From the Bal Halachas Gedolos, it appears as loit man the Omar as cotton moiled. There is a question whether a minor can give birth, but according to the opinion that a minor can give birth, is there yotze the mitzvah from Pru Revu? He will fulfill the mitzvah of being fruitful, multiplied, to have children with the children that were born when he was a minor, because he had those children. The children exist, even though the obligation he did when he was a minor, it stays when he becomes an adult. Based another example. An non-Jew who circumcised himself for the purpose of a mitzvah. If he doesn't do it for a mitzvah, he's just not cutting himself. But here he's cutting himself with the intent to do a mitzvah. Even though he's not doing it for conversion. So he meets the general qualification, is im nisgayer achakach ein tzorech lahativ damris. If later on he converts, he doesn't have to for the blood of the covenant. It doesn't have to go like you usually if a person who is circumcised. So when he's converts, he has to still pour some blood, dambris. But over here, it is not necessary because he already fulfilled the mitzvah that he did when he was a non-Jew. Lasts for maybe even when he becomes Jewish. And number three, the third example that Rebbe brings down is the mitzvah for Yediyas HaTorah. The mitzvah is to know Torah. Is man mekayim the divrei Torah when was man lernen bekatnusay. Fulfill the mitzvah of knowing Torah with the words of Torah that you learn when you're a minor. Because through the study he has the knowledge when he's an adult. So, what does this mean? So, from this we see clearly from the Ragachover's examples, he's not telling you before, like by the Korban Pesach we brought down before, that before because you had a connection, the cotton was mechuyev, the minui of the in the Korban Pesach, and that's why he's exempt. But here we see what he's telling you is that even you're not obligated at all, but still it lasts through even when the time of obligation. From the Dugmois Analysis movement, since these examples, there's no obligation at all. As the Sforah for Ragachover is a Bazunder Bir, this idea of Ragachover is a separate explanation from Saka Rambam and the ruling of the Rambam Anal. Das heißt, that means, das was schreibt, the Gam Petur, even an exemption. Yet, Kivon da Polish Lokayemis Niftar Abis Machin is Chayiv, since the act lasts, so it exempts you even when you're obligated. Nit dafke bazelcha mitzvahs is not talking about such mitzvahs was the Torah had befeidish marbe given a cotton bedin asiyas a mitzvah. In those mitzvahs, the Torah clearly included a minor in doing the mitzvah. So you're going to say he did the mitzvah because the Torah told him. And then that mitzvah that he was told then lasts later on. That's the case. No. Nores is a petur. This is an exemption, which means their cotton is nit mechuyev b'zeh. So, and still the act lasts. It goes even for the time that he's obligated. It's a potter. Not that he's mechuyev, but a chiyuv of a cotton that applied to a gadol, but it's a potter. He's not mechuyev the cotton, and still it helps him when he's a gadol. This was the previous explanation. That if you do a mitzvah, and the Torah included that would be the previous explanation. That the cotton is mechuyev Torah, and that mitzvah of the cotton lasts. That Pesach Sheni, he doesn't have to bring again because he fulfilled his obligation. No, but it's more than that, as he explains. Al Derech, the Rebbe first brings down the previous explanation of the Ragachover. For Ragachover. The previous explanation of the Ragachover, as a cotton is shaykh tzasiyas a Pesach min HaTorah, that he has a connection to doing Pesach min HaTorah. Ken werden amonu min HaTorah of Korban Pesach. He can become counted on the Korban Pesach as echad mibnei HaChabura. He can be one of the Ragachover says that's a possibility. Their Zaindiga cotton is a potter, nit mechuyev in them, but because he's a minor, he's exempt and not obligated, but he could do it. So in such a case, you can say no, that he could still counts for him when he's an adult. Limited to that, but from the Ragachover's examples, we see that even if he doesn't have any connection, it's a totally patur. It's not only that he's not obligated to do so, but he could do so min HaTorah, he would be counted. But even if there's no obligation at all, and still doing the mitzvah then helps from the time that he's obligated. Nor a feel by the mitzvahs, women gefind nicht, as der Kotten soll haben Mascheiches zu din asiyas mitzvah. Even by those mitzvahs, we don't find that the minor should have any connection to doing with the mitzvahs. Is ein Pulas ha-mitzvah als Kotten. So his act, when he does the mitzvah as a minor, upotter, and he's exempt therefore. Oibzi is kayemes nimsheches. If it exists, it continues. Pater timshas gadlus, so that will exempt him when he's an adult. Okay, because that's really what the Ragachover is saying over here, which is a different explanation than before. Before he said that the minor has a shaykhis and it's something that the minu helps. He's not a mechuyev, but the father's minu helps him. And then you can say he's potter. But here the Ragachover is saying, no, that he's mechlal not mechuyev. This has no connection. With the erste zwei dugmoes now, like the first two examples. Okay, the last example, study Torah, is also mechuyev. The cotton is shaykh a little bit, but in the erste zwei dugmoes now, there was a cotton is nit mitzvahs peruruvu. A minor is not in the mitzvah of being fruitful multiply at all. And for course, a circumcision of a non-Jew, that's not commanded at all. There's no command such a thing. He's totally not shaykhs to the milah goy. What is at his klalni together mitzvahs milah? He's totally not in the boundaries at all milah at all. And still the Ragachover says as oichin difam. Also in those cases, since the act lasts, Difter ab is manshin is chayiv, so this exempts him even in the time when he's achoyiv. Same thing is in our case. Now we're going to say that the Korban Pesach, the minor, has no connection at all. You cannot be memane him either way. You cannot have a memane at all. Not Korban Pesach shenishchat ala cotton. Even if we will say as their cotton is minat Torah nit together minay, that the minor is from the Torah not defined at all. You cannot appoint him. Keep sakad morazot kanal as the Alter Rebbe rules. That's how we know that you could mitzvahs chinuch is doicha because he's not mechuyev in the mitzvah in Pesach. He cannot be part of the Korban Pesach, and yet we're memane him because the mitzvah chinuch is doicha, meaning that he has no shaykhs to the Korban Pesach. But still, so even he does the mitzvah that he has no connection to. Pesach, since they counted him on the Korban Pesach, doesn't matter. He participated in the Korban Pesach, even though he's not obligated. Bebald as Korban Pesach is an inyan vos pu'ulo shaloi kalem emes. The act of the Korban Pesach lasts. It lasts you, therefore, on the Pesach Sheni, when you're mechuyev, you don't have to bring a korban. Because we need to explain this. How do we say Mela bris lasts, a physical act? Mela pruruvu, a child was born, it lasts. What are we saying that the Korban Pesach, the act lasts? The act doesn't last, seemingly. But the Rebbe will explain that Simchas does. But the explanation is, as we'll see, patertes im bizman shenischai bepesach sheni. But still, such a act which is exempt, and you don't have to do it, but still, because it lasts, as explained, for the time that he's obligated Pesach Sheni, and he does not have to bring a Pesach Sheni if they counted on him the Pesach Rishon, even though he was not mechuyev at all. But this still needs explanation. Over there, when we say it lasts, we know why it lasts, because physically the children last, the bris milah lasts. What does it mean over here that the Korban Pesach lasts? We still require explanation. And now we can understand in the examples of above is doch the peulas ha-mitzvah ha-mitzius gashmis. The act of the mitzvah is a physical act. It impacts physically. Bonim, Mila, Yediyas HaTorah, knowledge of Torah also is something which you find the person knows it. Was that Petur, was there Potter, Cotton, the one who is exempt, the minor, he accomplished through his act. So that act can last even for when he's an adult. Mashen can be in the Daan, Korban Pesach, but in our case, Korban Pesach is doch der Korban und die Mitzvah nicht mehr Achilles Pesach. The Korban Pesach and the Mitzvah, nicht nur Achilles Pesach, is not just eating the Pesach, nor Shchitas HaPesach v'Akrovose. Mele, eating the Pesach is something that lasts, but offering the Pesach and shechting it in the Akrov, the Baldas Minat Torah is Akot Nid Begeder Minui. Since Minat Torah he's not counted, he's not defined as counted, Hastes doch. So that means as Minat Torah is by Cotton Nid given the Metzias. By the Cotton there wasn't the fact he didn't have, it wasn't Shchita there, it wasn't Barachas Kama, the Pulas HaMitzvah, the effect of the mitzvah. The mitzvah did not impact because the cotton it didn't affect the cotton because he's not mechuyeven. It's not, their korban is nit kibarach gevorim farim cotton. It was not brought for the cotton. He can't count him. And it wasn't brought for him. Bibalder is nit together minui. He's not accountable. So therefore, how are we saying that this whole act of shchita and minui, everything, when it really didn't take place as far as we're concerned, because the cotton, these are acts that are only valid. Shechting is just, you can shecht whatever, but it's only valid if it's minui, if it's otherwise. So how is this valid for the cotton so he doesn't have to do Pesach Sheni? But man das verstehen bei Hagdim Abir, the Rebbe will say, we'll understand this by explaining first the Divrei HaGershova b'negei lasis HaPesach, as the HaGershova says it as making the Pesach as Pu'ulo Sheloi Kayemes. He says that the act of making the first Pesach holds. That we learn from here that you don't make the Pesach Sheni, that the act of the first Pesach is last. L'cheira, it's understood. Biz nochon zman achilas ha-Pesach. Okay, we can understand till after the time of eating of the Korban Pesach. Why it lasts till after eating the Pesach, you can say that the act of the Korban lasts there. That's understood. Is that Agachav Mevayer? He explains how to last. You shechted it in the 14 in the afternoon, and we're saying that it's kayemes until after eating the Pesach, midnight, whatever, on the night, the 15th. Is that Agachav Mevayer? That Agachav explains this as the mitzvah for Nasi's HaPesach, that Nimshach Kozman Ha'achila. That the mitzvah of making the Pesach didn't stop when you made the Pesach, but it continues the entire time till you're eating, because the eating is inherently very tied to the Korban Pesach, because you were not yotze the shchita if something goes wrong in the achila. He brings the nafkimin al-alocha, he brings the nafkimin al-alocha that it is certain things, that conditions that you have to meet when you're eating the Korban Pesach in order for it to be a valid shchita. As is eine dot noim beis achila, v'chaz eine ma'akev shchita, there are certain conditions at the time that you're eating that if you don't meet those conditions, then you didn't shech the Korban Pesach. K'moy orlis shal zman achilas haPesach ma'akeves gam l'shchita. If a uncircumcised on the time of eating of the Pesach, if he was not circumcised, then that makes the shchita, invalidates the shchita as well. So if he circumcised in between the shechting the korban until the eating, then it would be okay. But if is an oral there, then that's going to hold back also the shchita. Und es ist muchach davon gufa, and this mitzvah itself, you have to be counted. If you're not counted, then the shchita is no good. There was a pesach in nechel. It's only eaten for those who are counted. Was their minimum muzayin lifnei shchitas pesach. So that must take place before the shechting of the pesach. So that means from the time of shchita at least, because this has to be even done before, because even the shechting, but shchitas pesach and achilas pesach are in hemshech. So you need to make sure it's not just shechted for the menuyim, it has to be shechted and it has to be eaten. And you start with the minui before shechting of the Pesach. You bring it to eat it. So therefore, if something goes wrong with those counted, those who didn't count eat the Pesach, then the shechita was no good. So that means that the act of shchita and the Achilles HaPesach are one continuous effort. So therefore it's lasts even after the shchita. Aber was ist der Mocker zu sagen? But what does the Ragachover say? What's his source? As Pu'ulo Shaloi Asiyas HaPesach Kayemes, that the act of making the Korban Pesach sustained. And when does it last for? Nochdem, the overs Mana Pesach, after the time of Pesach has already passed. Also, last you're not allowed to make a Korban Pesach on the 16th of Nisan. Not allowed to eat. Kayemes, so that there is a sustained pu'ula from that, this Pesach Sheni. Why is it up to Pesach Sheni? Because the father is in Shocht Olav Alakotten Berishim Potem Pesach Sheni. That's what we're saying, that if they shechted on the first Pesach, you don't have to bring the second Pesach. But what's the act that they did for the cotton, that when he was shechted the first Pesach, what lasts through the second Pesach? So how is it Kayam? So what does the Rabbi Chaver mean? So the Rebbe explains that you can't really separate between the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni. The Rebbe will explain now. And the Pesach Rishon is continues to Pesach Sheni, and therefore it's counted as if it exists through the Pesach Sheni. So the Rebbe we can say here is Loituman the Omar as Pesach Sheni is a regel b'fnei atzma. According to the view that Pesach Sheni is its own holiday. Was Hazoi Paskin the Rambam Kenal b'tchilas Sifal, right in the beginning of Sifal. So if it's its own holiday, why don't everybody makes second Pesach? Why is it only if you didn't make the first Pesach? There must be a connection there, because the reason why we have to make the second Pesach, because it's its own holiday. So why don't we have to make a second Pesach even if we did the first Pesach? Well, is noch Pesach Sheni Achiv b'fnei atzma. So und das wird gerechnet in Minyan HaMitzvahs in Rambam as a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. And the Rambam actually counts it in the number of mitzvahs as its own mitzvah to make the Pesach Sheni. Unochmer, and more than that, not only is it a separate mitzvah, you would be allowed, according to the Rambam, you would be allowed to make a Pesach Sheni, even if you intentionally didn't bring the first Pesach. That's a dependent mitzvah comes out, l'chayr. And yet we say, if you did do the first Pesach, you don't have to do the Pesach Sheni. Unochmer. The Das Rambam is Sefer HaMitzvah Shaloi. Is Afila Hazid B'Rishon Beikri B'Sheni. I'm saying wrong. That even if he did a mazid and he brought the second one, is a chayiv kodesh. He gets kodesh val v'bal Pesach Sheni is nit tashlumim min harishon regel b'fnei atzmei. Since it's not a makeup, it's its own yontif. So, therefore, it doesn't help you that you're going to bring the second Pesach. You have to bring the first one. If you didn't bring it, you're going to get Koros. So you see, on one hand, that Pesach Sheni is totally detached and separate from Pesach Rishon. It's a regel b'fnei atzmei, and it's not even going to make up for the Koros that you earned for the not bringing a korban Pesach Rishon. And still, we say that it is connected. That if you did bring the Pesach Rishon, you don't have to bring a Pesach Sheni from Desert. Even according to his opinion, is had gebracht a Pesach Rishon. If he did bring a Pesach Rishon, is a pot from Pesach Sheni, is exempt from Pesach Sheni. Why? If it's a separate mitzvah, but it's what's the idea? The idea over here is, as the pasuk articulates it, as Pesach Sheni is aiming with Pesach Rishon. The Pesach Sheni is one concept with Pesach Rishon. It's a separate mitzvah, but it's one concept. Beide seinen Kishmon Pesach. They're both, as you call them, Pesach, Rishon and Sheni. A korban of Yitzias Mitzrayim. It's a sacrifice of Yitzias Mitzrayim. Und there is man Tzitzich, man Pesach Rishon, this man Pesach Sheni. The time stretches from the first Pesach to the second Pesach. Und der Riber, and therefore, as Pesach Rishon, when you do the first Pesach Apula Nimsheches, it continues, nor Bizman Achilose, nor Biz Pesach Sheni. It continues to Pesach Sheni. You don't have to make another Pesach, because the Pesach Rishon you made keeps on going to the second Pesach. Und der Riber, it's like a second Haldir Fnei, but your Pesach Rishon continues. And therefore, if you made the first korban, you don't have to. Und der Riber, Afal Pias Pesach Sheni. Is a besonder chiyuv from Pesach Rishon, even though it's a separate obligation than the obligation of the first Pesach. Is there was at makriv and Pesach Rishon? If someone who did bring the offering on the Rishon is not mechuyev Pesach Sheni, is not obligated in the Pesach Sheni. While hod the pulas hakorban, the Pesach Rishon, because he has his act of the Pesach Rishon bis Pesach Sheni until the second Pesach. The Pu'ula from Asiyas Korban Pesach Rishon is Kayemes B'Pesach Pesach Sheni. The act of making the Korban Pesach Rishon lasts till Pesach Sheni. And that's why the explanation of the Ragachova that he explains in this second part of Ragachova, the second piece that we brought on Ragachova, that it is something which lasts through the time of the obligation also for the cotton. It never explains Yud. So based on this, we'll understand when the Geyet, so a cotton shehigdil, when Pesach Rishon the Pesach Sheni, as it pertains to a minor who became an adult in between the first and the second Pesach. Why we would have to make why he wouldn't have to bring a second korban. First in Jerusalem, was once spoken at length, the status of a cotton, a minor in general. Der Fun Gufa was Torah is Mechayev Ha'idin, a mitzvah's tikkuv sheyigdol. The fact alone that the Torah obligates a yid mitzvahs, when you become an adult, all of a sudden you're doing the mitzvahs. But how are you going to know to do the mitzvahs if you hadn't prepared to it? Is muchrach zu sagen, so we have to say, therefore, as the halachas from the mitzvahs, that the laws of the mitzvahs, be krishma, tefillin, kiyotzevay, as reading the Shema, putting on the tefillin, are similar, is a cotton mechuyev to learn and eider ervert agodl. He's obligated to study them before he becomes an adult. What it means is, even without the obligation of education, which first of all is from the Rabbanan, and that's the obligation of the father. Even without the obligation of education, is mitzad tzivui haTorah, because the command of Torah, a minor is obligated to prepare himself while he's a minor to the mitzvahs, to the mitzvahs in which he becomes obligated as soon as he becomes adult. Because how is he going to know how to do it? Well, anders wird er nicht kennen, because otherwise, if he doesn't uh, study and he is not going to, so how are you going to do it when you're adult? Well, then a mitzvah to prepare for the mitzvah. So there is an obligation on a cotton to prepare himself for the mitzvahs that he's going to be obligated later on in life, because there's no way that he can do the mitzvahs without that preparation. And the Rebbe said he explained the mitot in the argument with this idea. We explained the negei, the shakel v'tarya yidua, the known debate that nakotn sheigdel bepurim the orim ukofes tezvov other shechal b'shabbos. So you have a minor who became an adult on Purim on the 15th. Cities that have a wall, they're tezvov other, called the Shushan Purim. If he becomes an adult on tezvov, shechal b'shabbos. But when Purim, Shushan Purim, when the Purim or Mokofis comes on Shabbos, then we read the Megillah on the 14th, on Friday. Was there chiv for Krisa Megillah is Medan Magdim Bechlal to Yudal Oder. So generally speaking, we proceeded to the 14th of Oder. But in the case when he's becoming an adult, only on the 15th of Oder, is a demol b'Yudalet Oder Nochakotten, so then he's still a minor. So it turns out, as a cotton is Mekayim Zain Chiyuv Shemechuyiv Boyals Godel, he will be fulfilling his obligation that he has to do as Godel when he's 15 when in the 15th of Adar, when he is actually an adult, and has to read the Megillah. He will be reading it on the 14th. Why? Because there is an obligation in the Torah for the thing that is going to be mechuyev even before the chiv. So based on that rule, he's just moving. So we understand this. Now, why the reading in why the Korban Pesach on the first one exempts him from the second Korban Pesach? The Baldas Kidei Tzohabim Kris HaMegillah, the Tezvov. Okay, in order, the rule the Rebbe says that he's going back still to the Megillah. So the Baldas Kidei Tzohabim Kris HaMegillah BeTezvov Muzer Zileini B'Yidal. In order to have the Megillah reading on the 15th, he has to read in the 14th. Is Afal P. How is he going to get it on the 15th? There's no Megillah on the 15th. So he has to do the 14th to have the 15th. So his education, his obligation to read in the 15th has to come by reading it as a minor. Is Afal Pivos Mitzad Yem Yudal Atzma is Nichayim to Mechayiv Zamikris Hamegillah, even though from the 14th itself it doesn't fit to obligate reading Megillah, is in their kviz of im chalachiv gov. But in that setup, when 14th and when Purim is on Shabbos, there is an obligation on him, not only Chino, so leinen the Megillah b'Yudalid als hechsher to sein chiv b'yom tezvav, as a preparation for his obligation tezvav. So he has to read it on the 14th, on Friday, and he has a complete obligation to read it then, because that's the only way he can fulfill his obligation on the 15th, because there's no reading on the 15th. Apihanal, as a cotton vert mechuyev min ha-Torah, that a cotton becomes obligated from the Torah in the inyonim velche zayin im machshir lechiyuva begadlusay. In those areas that prepare him to his obligation in his adulthood, that becomes an obligation of the Torah. Yesh lemer yiseidim mizem, we can say them more in our case. Even though that a minor is at all not connected to making Pesach, is aber nafal when he will make Pesach Rishon Pesach Sheni. In a case when he becomes an adult between the first and second Pesach was Demel B'Shana Zu. In that situation, in that year, this year, when when he's becoming an adult in between, Hod der Cotton then Ian from Pesach. The cotton has the idea of Pesach is with him. Evet doch werden a God lifnei Pesach Sheni. He's going to become an adult before Pesach Sheni. Is it bald as Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni sein ein Hemshach von ein Zman? Since Pesach Rishon are one continuous of one time, Kinal Siftes, and we said before Siftes that Nimshach the whole period. The Riber is by them cotton verandert in for Pesach Rishon. This cotton in that situation has the Pesach Rishon. Als Hechsher to sein Pesach Sheni, as a preparation to his obligation in the second Pesach, which will come when he becomes Bar Mitzvah. And since it's one period, so therefore there is an obligation for him even in Pesach Rishon, and that's why he doesn't have to make the Pesach Sheni. To use a different language. Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni is in Canal. Since the first and second Pesach are really one idea, when that is mechuyev in Pesach Sheni and he's obligated in the second Pesach, is the chiyuv von asiyas Pesach shaykh tzeim shemitchilas ha'inyan. So the obligation to make Pesach belongs to him also in the beginning, the Pesach Rishon. Therefore, chotz is nicht shaykh zu sagen, even though we can't say as all kenem mekayim zayin mitzvahs asiyas korban Pesach, the Pesach Rishon can't say that he can fulfill the mitzvahs Pesach Rishon when there is no hakot, when he's a minor. Is aber durch them. Was shochtu Allah berishet. They shachted for him in the first one. Hoter di pi'ula. He has the act, not nit them ki b'chiv. The makrobes ha-Pesach. It's not that he fulfilled the obligation, because he's not obligated then. Als hechsher l'chiyuve Pesach Sheni. That act prepares for his obligation in Pesach Sheni. Ubemela, and therefore, kivan da pu'ula shaloi kayemes, nifterab, his mansion is chayiv. Since the act stays, he's exempt even the time that he's obligated. Oh, this is amazing, and it's a lot to think about, but it's a long, detailed, I don't want to say complicated. It's pretty clear what the Rebbe is saying over here, but you gotta think through all the details. This is Sichos, Motzei Shabbos Parshas Tzav, Achrim Shel Pesach, Motzei Shabbos Parshas Shmini, Tovshin Lamed Tes.